The entire galaxy was searching for a missing princess. Nobody expected to find her laughing. The emergency beacon pulsed crimson across 1,000 command screens. In the heart of the Aurelian Star Empire, where silver towers pierced the clouds and orbital rings glowed like halos above the planet, a silence heavier than panic had settled over the royal court. Princess Ava Celestia was gone. Not kidnapped, not declared dead, simply gone. 3 days earlier, her personal shuttle had vanished from the Imperial tracking network during what should have been a routine diplomatic transfer between royal stations. Since then, the Empire had mobilized on a scale usually reserved for asteroid impacts and stellar disasters. Patrol cruisers swept shipping lanes. Recon drones searched mountain ranges. Intelligence officers combed through millions of transmissions. Every hour that passed without answers pushed the Empire closer to crisis. The princess was more than a member of the royal family. She was the future face of the Empire. Intelligent, graceful, admired across dozens of systems. At least, that was the official story. Grand Admiral Lucien Vale stood at the center of the Imperial Operations Chamber, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as holographic maps floated around him. Blue search grids expanded across sectors by the minute. Hundreds of officers worked silently beneath the glow of data screens. Nobody wanted to be responsible for failure. "Any updates?" Lucien asked. His voice remained calm, though exhaustion lingered beneath every word. A young officer swallowed hard. "No confirmed sightings, sir." The latest scan of Sector 12 came back negative. Lucien stared at the map. 3 days. 3 entire days. The princess had disappeared without ransom demands, threats, or signs of sabotage. That fact worried him more than anything. Princess Ava had spent her entire life surrounded by protocol, advisors, ceremonies, and expectations. Every minute of every day had been planned years in advance. Every smile photographed. Every public appearance analyzed. Every friendship approved. The galaxy believed she lived a perfect life. Lucien knew better. He remembered seeing her during official receptions, standing perfectly still beneath crystal chandeliers, smiling politely, saying exactly the right words, looking like someone trapped behind invisible glass. "Expand the search another 50 light years," he ordered, "and double reconnaissance coverage near independent colonies." "Yes, sir." Around him, the chamber came alive with fresh activity. Yet none of it felt like progress. Somewhere beyond those maps, beyond those stars, a young woman had vanished from the center of the most powerful empire in known space. Meanwhile, on countless worlds, rumors spread faster than facts. News stations broadcast non-stop coverage. Analysts debated possible conspiracies. Citizens gathered in cafes and transit hubs, staring at giant public screens. Some feared political instability. Others feared war. Nobody imagined the truth, because the truth was almost ridiculous. Several hundred light years away from the imperial capital, on a remote ice-covered moon called Haven's Reach, the evening sky shimmered with green auroras. Wind carried fine crystals of frozen snow across endless white plains. The temperature hovered near 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Far from trade routes and political centers, the settlement consisted of fewer than 300 residents. Most people there had never seen a member of the royal family in person. Most didn't care. Life on Haven's Reach revolved around weather systems, maintenance schedules, and surviving another winter. The stars overhead felt closer than government decrees. And somewhere beneath those dancing curtains of light, completely hidden from the Empire's search efforts, the missing princess looked up at the sky and smiled. Not the practiced smile used during diplomatic ceremonies. Not the polished expression seen on official broadcasts. A real smile. The kind that reached her eyes. The kind nobody in the royal court had seen in years. She sat alone outside a small cabin perched near the edge of a frozen valley. Warm light spilled from the windows behind her. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the cold air. For the first time in a very long time, nobody was watching her. No cameras. No advisors. No guards. No expectations. Somewhere in the distance, a maintenance vehicle hummed across the snow. its headlights cut through the darkness like twin stars. The driver had no idea that the entire galaxy was searching for the woman sitting less than a quarter-mile away. And perhaps more surprisingly, the princess had no intention of being found. Not yet. The maintenance vehicle groaned softly as it rolled across the frozen valley, its oversized tires crunching through a fresh layer of snow. Ethan Carter leaned forward behind the controls, one hand resting on the steering wheel while the other balanced a steaming travel mug of coffee. The heater rattled somewhere beneath the dashboard, fighting a losing battle against the cold creeping through the metal frame. Outside, green ribbons of aurora drifted across the sky like slow-moving rivers of light. Ethan glanced at the weather scanner mounted beside him. Wind speeds were climbing again. Another storm was forming beyond the northern ridge. Nothing unusual. On Haven's Reach, storms were as common as sunrise. He took another sip of coffee and continued toward the atmospheric relay tower, perched on a rocky hill nearly 2 miles from the settlement. The tower was old, older than most of the equipment on the moon. Every few weeks, something froze, jammed, shorted out, or simply decided to stop working. That was why the colony paid him. Not because he was extraordinary, just because he knew how to keep old machines alive. 20 minutes later, he parked beside the tower and stepped outside. The cold hit immediately. Sharp, clean, familiar. His boots sank several inches into the snow as he walked toward the access hatch. The steel ladder creaked beneath his weight. Above him, warning lights blinked steadily against the darkness. Ethan opened the maintenance panel and frowned. Ice crystals had formed along several external connectors. Of course, he muttered. You lasted 3 whole weeks this time. He pulled a toolkit from his shoulder bag and got to work. The repetitive motions helped clear his mind. Tighten, adjust, scan, replace, repeat. Life on Haven's Reach was simple that way. Machines broke. People fixed them. Problems usually had solutions. It was one of the reasons he had stayed. Back on Earth, everything felt louder. Faster, more complicated. Out here, the stars seemed honest. Nearly an hour passed before the relay returned to full operation. Ethan sealed the panel and checked the diagnostics one final time. Green across the board. Good enough. As he climbed down the ladder, movement caught his eye. A figure stood near the edge of the ridge, overlooking the valley. Ethan froze for a second. Nobody should have been out there at this hour, especially not with another storm approaching. The woman stood perfectly still, her pale coat shifting gently in the wind. Long silver blonde hair reflected faint traces of aurora light. She looked strangely out of place against the frozen landscape, like someone who belonged in a painting rather than on a remote frontier moon. Ethan approached cautiously, boots crunching across the snow. You know, this is a terrible place for sightseeing, right? He called out. The woman turned. For a brief moment, surprise flashed across her face. Then it disappeared behind a calm expression. Her eyes studied him carefully, not fearful, not defensive, simply observant. I was looking at the sky, she said. Her voice was soft, but carried clearly through the cold air. Ethan glanced upward. Fair enough. It is one of the better skies around. The corner of her mouth twitched slightly. Not quite a smile. Not quite serious either. He stopped several feet away. You from the settlement? The question lingered, just long enough for him to notice. Recently arrived, she answered. Ethan nodded. That happened occasionally. Researchers, survey crews, freight pilots waiting out storms. He did not press further. People came to frontier worlds for all kinds of reasons. Most preferred privacy. The woman seemed relieved by his lack of curiosity. Ethan shoved his gloves into his pockets. Well, your timing is bad. Weather station says a storm will be here within the hour. Her gaze shifted toward the distant horizon where dark clouds were beginning to gather. That sounds unfortunate. Ethan laughed quietly. That is one way to describe it. For the first time, something warm appeared in her expression. Not happiness exactly. More like amusement at hearing someone speak so casually about a blizzard. The wind picked up, carrying fine snow across the ridge. Ethan looked toward the approaching clouds and then back at her. I have a cabin nearby. Hot coffee. Reliable heating. At least most days. He shrugged. You are welcome to wait out the storm there if you want. The woman stared at him for several seconds, as though evaluating something far beyond the offer itself. Finally, she nodded once. "Thank you." Ethan smiled. "No problem. Come on." Before the weather decides to get creative, the storm arrived faster than expected. By the time Ethan's vehicle reached the cabin, visibility had dropped to less than 50 feet. Snow hissed against the reinforced windows while wind rattled the exterior panels like distant waves striking a ship. Warm yellow light spilled across the small living room as the door sealed shut behind them. The sudden silence felt almost unreal after the howling cold outside. Ethan hung his coat near the heater and motioned toward a chair beside the fireplace unit. "Make yourself comfortable. The heating system still works, which puts this place above average for the neighborhood." The woman looked around slowly. Her eyes moved across shelves filled with maintenance manuals, weather reports, old paper books, and half-disassembled equipment scattered across a workbench. Nothing about the cabin looked impressive. Everything about it looked lived in. She removed her gloves carefully and sat near the heater. Ethan disappeared into the small kitchen area before returning with 2 steaming mugs. "Coffee," he said. "Not fancy, but it is hot." She accepted the mug. The warmth seemed to surprise her. For a moment, she simply stared at the rising steam. Ethan settled into a chair across from her. The room fell quiet except for the gentle hum of machinery hidden inside the walls. Outside, the storm continued building strength. "So," Ethan said eventually, "what brings someone to Haven's Reach?" The question arrived casually. No pressure, no suspicion. The woman lowered her eyes to the coffee. This was the moment she had expected. Every conversation eventually reached it. "Who are you? Where are you from? Why are you here?" In her experience, people rarely stopped asking until they received answers. She had spent her entire life learning how to navigate questions, learning which truths to reveal and which to hide. "Just traveling," she said. Ethan nodded once. "That sounds expensive." She blinked. Of all possible responses, that had not been one of them. Expensive? Most people do not end up on a frozen moon by accident. A faint smile touched her lips. "That is probably true." Ethan leaned back. "Well, everybody has their reasons." And then, to her surprise, he moved on. No follow-up questions. No investigation. No attempt to uncover more. The conversation drifted toward weather patterns, supply shipments, and the challenges of maintaining equipment during winter storms. The woman found herself answering more than she intended. Not because Ethan pushed, because he did not. Several minutes later, his communication terminal chimed softly from a nearby desk. Ethan glanced toward the screen. A news broadcast had automatically opened. The image displayed a familiar face. Her face. The official portrait showed perfect posture, carefully styled hair, and the polished smile she had practiced since childhood. Bold text flashed beneath the image. "Missing royal heir. Search efforts expand across 20 systems." The woman felt her stomach tighten. Instinctively, she looked toward Ethan. He barely glanced at the screen before reaching over and muting the broadcast. "News gets dramatic every time somebody important disappears," he said. "Makes it hard to enjoy dinner." For a second, she could only stare at him. The image had been visible, clear, impossible to miss. Yet Ethan returned his attention to his coffee as if nothing significant had happened. "You are not interested?" she asked carefully. Ethan shrugged. "Should I be?" She looked toward the frozen window. "The entire galaxy seems interested. The entire galaxy has more free time than I do." A laugh almost escaped her. She stopped it immediately. The sound felt unfamiliar. Dangerous somehow. Ethan noticed her expression. "What?" She shook her head. "Nothing." But something inside her had shifted. For 3 days, she had hidden from fleets, governments, and search teams. For 3 days, every transmission she intercepted had treated her like a symbol, an asset, a crisis. Sitting in that small cabin, surrounded by old books and broken machinery, she was experiencing something far stranger. Someone who saw her face and did not immediately see a princess. The storm remained for 2 more days. Snow piled against the cabin walls until only the upper half of the windows remained visible. Wind sensors mounted outside reported gusts exceeding 80 miles per hour. Every few hours, Ethan checked the readings from the weather station, shook his head, and muttered the same conclusion. Nobody is going anywhere today. By the third morning, the cabin had settled into a strange rhythm. The woman who called herself Ava occupied the spare room. Ethan worked on maintenance reports, repaired equipment, and occasionally disappeared into the workshop attached to the back of the cabin. Neither of them seemed particularly eager to discuss what would happen once the storm passed. Late that afternoon, Ethan emerged from the workshop carrying a small diagnostic scanner and stopped abruptly. The kitchen looked like a disaster zone. Flour covered half the counter. A mixing bowl sat upside down on the floor. One cabinet door hung slightly crooked, something that may once have been bread rested inside a baking tray with all the structural integrity of concrete. Ava stood in the middle of the room, staring at the results of her efforts. "I can explain," she said. Ethan looked at the ruined kitchen, then at the tray, then back at her. "Please do. I followed the instructions exactly." Those instructions did not include whatever happened to that cabinet. Ava crossed her arms. The cabinet attacked first. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared. Then he laughed. Not politely, not quietly. A full laugh that echoed through the cabin. Ava looked genuinely offended. "You are finding this amusing." "A little." The recipe claimed this was easy. Ethan picked up the instruction tablet lying nearby. "This recipe is for children." Her expression somehow became even more serious. That only made things worse. Ethan laughed again. Ava tried to maintain her dignity. She really did. The effort lasted approximately 3 seconds before she finally rolled her eyes. "I dislike you. You dislike cooking. That too." Together, they spent the next hour cleaning the kitchen. Ethan showed her how to measure ingredients properly and why mixing speed mattered. Ava insisted the process was unnecessarily primitive. Ethan argued that ancient baking techniques had survived for centuries for a reason. Their debate somehow expanded into an argument about whether technology improved everything. Neither convinced the other, yet both seemed to enjoy trying. As evening approached, they carried fresh mugs of coffee outside onto the cabin's covered porch. The storm had finally broken. Above them, the sky stretched clear and endless. Green and blue auroras drifted across the darkness like glowing rivers. Snow reflected the colors until the entire valley appeared painted with light. Ava rested her elbows on the railing. For a while, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable, not awkward, just shared. Ethan finally nodded toward the horizon. "You know, most visitors spend their first week taking pictures. I am not most visitors. That much is obvious." She smiled faintly. "And you? Have you always lived here?" Ethan shook his head. "No. Earth originally." "Why leave?" He considered the question. Everything felt crowded. Everybody seemed to be chasing something. Promotions, status, attention. He stared out across the frozen valley. "I got tired." Ava studied him quietly. "So you came here?" "Pretty much." "And you are happy?" Ethan thought about it, then shrugged. "Most days." The answer surprised her. Not because it sounded impressive, because it sounded honest. Back home, every answer carried strategy. Every conversation carried expectations. Here a man could simply say most days and mean it. A faint smile touched her lips again. Ethan noticed. "What?" "Nothing. That is the second time you have said that." Ava looked away toward the auroras. The colors reflected softly in her eyes. She had attended state dinners attended by world leaders. She had stood beneath crystal domes, surrounded by thousands of admirers. She had visited planets most citizens would only see in documentaries. Yet somehow this small wooden porch felt more real than all of it. And for the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow. The next morning arrived beneath a sky so clear it seemed carved from glass. Sunlight spilled across the frozen valley, turning the snow into fields of silver. Ethan stepped outside carrying a toolbox and found Ava already sitting on the porch railing, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She appeared completely absorbed by the view. For several moments, neither spoke. The distant hum of atmospheric processors echoed softly across the valley. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a supply transport crossed the horizon, leaving a thin white trail against the blue sky. "You are up early," Ethan said. Ava glanced toward him. "I cannot sleep. Bad mattress. Too many thoughts." Ethan nodded, as if that explanation made perfect sense. Then again, on Haven's Reach, it probably did. He set the toolbox down and looked toward the weather station several hundred yards away. One of the external sensors had stopped responding overnight. Another routine repair. Another ordinary day. "Want to come with me?" he asked. Ava blinked. "To repair machinery? That is the exciting life I lead." "You have a very generous definition of exciting. You have not seen the sensor. It is particularly dramatic." To his surprise, she stood up. "Very well. I wish to meet this dramatic sensor." 20 minutes later, they were walking through fresh snow beneath a cloudless sky. The cold air carried the clean scent of ice and pine from distant forests. Ethan explained the purpose of various monitoring systems, while Ava listened carefully. Most people would have become bored after the first 5 minutes. She did not. She asked questions. Good questions. Questions that forced Ethan to think before answering. By the time they reached the weather station, he found himself explaining atmospheric pressure fluctuations with the enthusiasm of someone discussing a favorite hobby. Ava noticed, "You actually enjoy this." Ethan looked surprised. "Of course. It is maintenance work." "Exactly." He tapped the side of the sensor housing. "Every storm forecast, every supply route, every emergency warning. Somebody has to make sure these things work." Ava watched him kneel beside the equipment. There was no audience, no recognition, no prestige attached to what he did. Yet he treated the task with genuine care. The realization lingered in her thoughts long after the repair was finished. Later that evening, they sat beside the fireplace while snow drifted gently outside. The cabin felt smaller than usual. Not cramped, comfortable. Ethan flipped through one of his old paper books while Ava stared into the flames. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. Ethan lowered the book. "Sure." She hesitated. The question felt strangely difficult. "Do you ever feel lonely out here?" The room grew still. Ethan considered the answer carefully. "Sometimes." Ava waited. "That is all. Pretty much." She frowned. Most people would give a longer answer. Ethan smiled faintly. "Loneliness is normal. Everybody feels it sooner or later." He closed the book and rested it on the table. "The trick is not letting it convince you that you are alone." Ava lowered her eyes. Something in that sentence struck deeper than she expected. Ethan noticed the change in her expression. He did not press. He never did. That was becoming increasingly unusual. After a long silence, Ava spoke again. "Where I grew up, there were always people around me. Big family." Ethan asked. "Something like that. Sounds crowded." A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Ethan smiled. "There it is." "What?" "That laugh." Ava looked away immediately. It was not a laugh. It absolutely was. "You are mistaken. I'm a trained professional. A weather technician is not trained to identify laughter. You would be surprised." This time she actually laughed. A real one. Bright and unguarded. The sound filled the cabin for only a few seconds before fading away. Yet the silence that followed felt different. Warmer somehow. Neither of them noticed the news alert quietly appearing on Ethan's terminal across the room. Another report. Another expansion of the search effort. Another promise that the missing royal heir would soon be found. Ava never looked at the screen. For the first time since arriving on Haven's Reach, she had forgotten to wonder whether anyone was looking for her. The search had reached Haven's Reach before the people living there realized it. Every terminal in the settlement carried the same headline. Every public screen displayed the same image. Every incoming transmission repeated the same promise. The missing royal heir would be found soon. Ava stood alone near the cabin window one gray afternoon, watching snow drift across the valley while Ethan worked at the far end of the room. The terminal beside him quietly cycled through another news report. She recognized the anchor. She recognized the official statement. She even recognized the carefully selected photograph they used whenever the Empire wanted her to appear approachable. The image showed confidence, grace, perfection. It did not show exhaustion. It did not show loneliness. It certainly did not show the woman standing beside a frosted window, wondering why she felt more at peace on a forgotten moon than she ever had inside a royal palace. "Looks like they're still searching," Ethan said casually without looking up from the equipment in front of him. Ava felt her heartbeat quicken. "You have seen the reports? Hard to avoid them." He tightened a connector and returned to the diagnostic screen. "Seems important." Ava waited, then waited a little longer. Eventually she asked, "And what do you think?" Ethan glanced up. "About what?" "The missing heir." He considered the question. "I think whoever she is, she probably has a reason for disappearing." Ava stared at him. "That is all. What else is there?" She turned back toward the window. Outside, pale sunlight reflected across endless snowfields. Most people seemed convinced something terrible happened. Ethan shrugged. "Maybe, but everybody always assumes the worst. And you do not. Not unless I have evidence." He smiled faintly. "Comes with fixing machines. If something stops working, you check the obvious explanations before assuming the universe is ending." Ava laughed softly despite herself. Ethan pointed toward her. "There it is again." "What?" "That laugh." She shook her head. "You seem unusually proud whenever you cause it." "That is because it is rare." Ava tried to hide her smile. The effort failed. Ethan returned to his workbench while she continued watching the snow. Yet his words remained with her. "Whoever she is, she probably has a reason for disappearing." Such a simple statement. No judgment. No outright. No political analysis. Just understanding. Later that evening they shared dinner while auroras slowly awakened beyond the windows. Ethan had prepared a simple meal. Nothing elegant. Nothing worthy of a royal banquet. Yet Ava found herself enjoying it more than many formal dinners she could remember. Conversation drifted easily between them. Weather forecasts, books, childhood memories, strange stories from travelers passing through remote colonies. At one point, Ethan mentioned an old friend from Earth, someone he had not seen in years. "Do you miss him?" Ava asked. Ethan nodded. "Sure. Then why not leave and visit?" He smiled thoughtfully. "Because caring about people does not always mean holding on to them." Ava lowered her eyes. The answer struck somewhere deep inside her. For most of her life, every relationship had come attached to expectations, duties, obligations, politics. Ethan spoke about friendship the same way he spoke about weather patterns or broken machinery. Honest, simple, real. Hours later, after Ethan had gone to sleep, Ava remained awake beside the darkened window. The valley glowed beneath silver moonlight. Somewhere beyond those distant stars, fleets continued searching. Advisors worried. Generals coordinated operations. Entire worlds discussed her disappearance. All of them believed she needed to be rescued. Yet standing there in the quiet cabin, she found herself asking a question she had avoided for days. What if the place she had run away from was not the place she truly belonged? And perhaps even more unsettling, what if the ordinary human sleeping in the next room understood her better than anyone in the Empire ever had? The test began the following afternoon. Ava had not planned it first. The idea arrived quietly while she watched Ethan repair a portable communications array beside the cabin. For days, she had wondered the same thing. What would happen if he knew? Not suspected, not guessed. Knew. Every news report spoke about the reward being offered for information leading to her recovery. The amount had become almost absurd. Enough money to purchase private transports, homes, businesses, even entire settlements on frontier worlds. Enough to change someone's life forever. Ethan never mentioned it. That only made her more curious. He sat cross-legged in the snow, carefully reconnecting wiring beneath an open panel while sunlight reflected off the valley around them. Ava stepped outside, carrying a tablet she had intentionally left displaying the latest Imperial announcement. Her official portrait filled the screen. The resemblance was impossible to miss. She stopped beside him. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan glanced up. "Sure." She handed him the tablet. "Look closely." He accepted it without concern. His eyes moved across the article, then across the image, then back to the article. Ava watched carefully, waiting. Ethan frowned slightly. "That reward keeps getting bigger." That is what you noticed? Hard not to. Ava folded her arms. In the picture, Ethan looked from the screen to her face. For a brief moment, understanding appeared in his expression. Not shock, not disbelief, simply recognition. Oh, the single word landed softly between them. Ava felt unexpectedly nervous. Oh, Ethan handed the tablet back. You are her. She waited for more. It never came. That is all you have to say? Ethan returned his attention to the communications array. What would you like me to say? Ava stared at him. I lied to you. Yeah. For days. Also true. I am a missing heir to the largest empire in known space. Ethan nodded. Seems that way. The conversation was not going according to plan. You are not angry? She asked. Should I be? Most people would be. Ethan tightened one of the connectors before answering. Most people probably are not hiding from half the galaxy. Ava fell silent. Snow drifted gently across the valley. Somewhere in the distance, a cargo transport crossed the horizon. Finally, she asked the question that truly mattered. The reward is enough to change your life. Ethan sat back and looked at her directly. His expression remained calm, honest, familiar. Ava, if you wanted to leave, you could have left days ago. She blinked. What? I'm pretty sure the only reason you are still here is because you're not ready to go back yet. The simplicity of the statement hit harder than any speech could have. Ethan was not thinking about money, or status, or opportunity. He was thinking about her. Not the title, not the crown. Her. He stood and brushed snow from his gloves. You should probably call your family, though. Ava looked away quickly. Something tight formed at her chest. You think they are worried? Ethan gave her a look. Ava. For the first time since arriving on Haven's Reach, she laughed and wiped moisture from the corner of one eye at the same time. Ethan pretended not to notice. He simply picked up his toolbox and started walking back toward the cabin. After several steps, he looked over his shoulder. Coming. Ava followed him through the snow. Behind them, unnoticed by either of them, a long-range military reconnaissance satellite emerged from orbit above the moon. Its sensors swept across the valley. Seconds later, deep within the command center of the Imperial Search Fleet, an alert suddenly appeared. Location confirmed. The first sign was the sky. Ethan noticed it while carrying a crate of replacement components toward the workshop. The afternoon light suddenly dimmed. Not because of clouds, because something enormous had passed between the sun and the valley. He stopped and looked up. High above Haven's Reach, dozens of distant lights shimmered against the atmosphere. More appeared every second. Silent. Precise. Impossible to mistake. Ships. Ava stepped onto the porch moments later. The moment she saw the sky, her expression changed. Ethan did not need an explanation. He already knew. Your family found you, he said quietly. Ava stared upward as formation after formation descended from orbit. The sight should have felt reassuring. Familiar. Instead, something unexpected settled inside her chest. Regret. For several minutes, neither moved. The valley remained silent except for the distant hum of engines far above the clouds. Then communication alerts erupted across every device inside the cabin. Ethan's terminal flashed. His portable scanner flashed. Even the emergency receiver mounted beside the door began chiming. Incoming priority transmissions. Dozens of them. Ava looked away from the sky. I should answer. Ethan nodded. Probably. Yet neither immediately moved. The moment felt strangely fragile, as if answering that call would end something neither of them had fully understood until now. Eventually, Ava stepped inside and activated the nearest communication screen. The display flickered before revealing the face of Grand Admiral Lucien Vale. For the first time since arriving on Haven's Reach, Ava saw open relief on the old officer's face. Your Highness. His voice carried none of its usual formality. Thank the stars. Ava smiled softly. Hello, Lucien. Behind him, the command center appeared frozen in disbelief. Officers crowded around displays. Some looked exhausted. Others looked moments away from celebrating. Lucien exhaled slowly. The entire empire has been searching for you. Ava glanced toward the window where Ethan remained outside, watching the arriving ships. I know. Are you safe? The question lingered. Ava followed Ethan's silhouette through the glass. He was standing in the snow with his hands in his pockets, looking more curious than concerned. The sight made her smile again. "Yes," she said, "I am." An hour later, the first transports arrived near the valley. Sleek shuttles settled onto the snow in perfect formation. Uniformed personnel emerged and immediately began establishing communication relays and security perimeters. The operation was efficient, professional, predictable. Ethan watched everything from the porch with a mug of coffee in his hand. "Your people are very organized," he observed. Ava laughed softly. "That is one way to describe them." More vehicles arrived, more officials, more advisors. Within another hour, what had once been a quiet frontier valley looked like the temporary headquarters of a major government operation. Yet despite all the activity, one question continued spreading among the arriving personnel. How had the missing heir been found? What condition was she in? Many expected stress, isolation, emotional exhaustion. Some expected anger. Others expected tears. Nobody expected what they eventually saw. Because as the final shuttle landed and senior officials approached the cabin, they stopped in confusion. Through the porch window, they could see the Empire's missing heir sitting at a small kitchen table. A half-finished board game rested between her and a weather technician from Earth. Ava was laughing so hard she could barely finish her sentence. Ethan looked equally amused. Neither appeared interested in the fleet outside. Neither seemed aware that hundreds of people had spent days imagining dramatic rescue scenarios. The advisors exchanged bewildered glances. One officer quietly asked, "Is that really her?" Another nodded slowly. "It is." Nobody knew what to say next. They had come expecting a crisis. Instead, they had found something much harder to explain. Happiness. The following morning arrived quietly. The fleet remained overhead, suspended above the moon like a second constellation. Shuttles moved between orbit and the surface in carefully organized patterns. Advisors prepared reports. Officers coordinated departures. Communications channels across the Empire carried the same message. The missing heir had been found. Yet inside the small cabin, none of that seemed especially important. Ethan stood at the kitchen counter preparing coffee, while Ava sat near the window, watching sunlight spill across the valley. For a while, neither spoke. They simply listened to the familiar sounds of the cabin. The hum of the heater, the faint rattle of pipes, the whistle of distant wind moving across the snow. Ordinary sounds. Comfortable sounds. Ethan placed a mug beside her. One last dramatic frontier coffee. Ava smiled as she wrapped her hands around the warmth. "You keep calling it dramatic, because it sounds more impressive than average coffee." She laughed softly. The sound felt effortless now. Natural. Ethan noticed and shook his head. "You know, a few days ago, I was not even sure you liked me." Ava looked at him over the rim of the mug. "A few days ago, I was not sure either." Ethan pretended to look offended. "That is hurtful. You survived." "Barely." The conversation faded into another comfortable silence. Outside, movement caught Ava's attention. Grand Admiral Lucien Vale was approaching the cabin accompanied by several advisors. Their pace slowed as they neared the porch. Through the glass, Lucien watched the scene inside. The coffee mugs, the casual conversation, the smile he had almost forgotten she possessed. He remembered years of ceremonies, years of formal appearances, years of watching the future ruler of the Empire carry responsibilities far heavier than anyone her age should have carried. Yet in all those years, he could not remember seeing her look this relaxed. One of the advisors standing beside him spoke quietly. "We should begin departure preparations." Lucien nodded, but his eyes remained on the cabin. In a moment, Ava eventually stepped outside to meet them. The cold air brushed against her face. The valley stretched endlessly behind her. Lucien offered a respectful bow. "Your Highness." Ava smiled. "Hello, Lucien." The old admiral studied her carefully. Then he glanced toward Ethan, who remained near the doorway, holding his coffee. "You seem well." Ava followed his gaze. "I am." Lucien noticed something then. It was not visible in reports, not measurable in data. It was unmistakable. The exhaustion was gone. The tension was gone. In their place was something infinitely rarer: peace. Several hours later, departure procedures began. Equipment was packed. Schedules confirmed. Shuttles prepared for launch. The Empire was ready to bring its princess home. As the final transport waited nearby, Ava stood beside Ethan near the edge of the valley. Neither seemed eager to say goodbye. The wind moved gently across the snow between them. "So," Ethan said, "I guess this is where important people leave." Ava smiled. "Apparently." He looked toward the waiting shuttle. "Your family will be happy." "I know. And you?" Ava followed his gaze toward the horizon. The frozen plains, the weather station, the small cabin, the place where nobody had treated her like a symbol. The place where somebody had simply treated her like a person. "I think I finally remember who I am," she said quietly. Ethan nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. Maybe it did. The shuttle engines began warming in the distance. Ava took one last look at the valley before turning toward the transport. Halfway there, she glanced back. Ethan was still standing exactly where she had left him, hands in his pockets, snow drifting around him, watching her with the same easy smile he had worn from the beginning. No expectations, no demands, no conditions, just kindness. Years later, historians would document the largest search operation in Imperial history. Analysts would study timelines, communications logs, and recovery reports. They would discuss political consequences and strategic decisions. Yet none of those records would capture the truth. The Empire believed it had sent an entire fleet to recover a missing princess. What it actually recovered was a young woman who had learned how to laugh again. And somewhere beneath the endless stars of a quiet frontier moon, an ordinary human remained unaware that the greatest thing he had repaired was never a machine at all.